government and such, there's a lot more of a hub. It's not as just people kind of coming in at the night and breaking in and taking someone and lynching them. It's more organized, which made it very scary, because they had the potential to really gain that power and move up.
So were they strongest at the local level or at the state level? Because they weren't running anything nationally, from what I understand, right? They were nationwide.
They had state officials elected,
The
but
governor was
Yeah.
part of the KKK.
a lot more
Governor
locally,
was,
and
yeah.
so community by community, you'd see like Colorado Springs was very strong, but there's other communities that there wasn't much of an influence in. So I'd say the bigger urban.
Yeah.
Wasn't Denver a national hub for one? It was a huge KKK hub on a national level.
I know he was accused, I know Woodrow Wilson was accused of being associated. But I don't think anything ever, there was no proof around that, because he segregated DC and because he was very anti-black. I don't think that anything's ever, my understanding is no one ever proved it, but he was accused of it.
Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black was a known Ku Klux Klan member.
You know, Carlota maybe said, somebody was telling us that the Colorado governor in the 30s said all Latinos need to leave. Maybe that was Marjorie.
Marjorie.
Do you remember what I'm talking about? I wonder
I do
if that was
remember.
that same Colorado governor you're talking about.
Oh, maybe, I don't know, I just don't know, I don't know.
That was
It was
in a
actually
deportation.
What?
That was in a deportation
Yeah.
wave.
Right.
And it was
So-
my understanding from Marjorie's conversation yesterday that the KKK, the second surge of the KKK in Colorado ended actually, or kind of dissolved a bit earlier than it did nationally, because there was some corruption at the higher level with
Right,
this
the
money
money,
structure.
right.
Yeah, that's.
So I think she said that was actually in 26.
Oh, okay.
So it was before
But
that.
he still could have been.
Before
Yeah,
it, absolutely.
yeah. But that's what you're saying, as far as the power goes.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
That makes sense. I think one of the things I was thinking about when I put this up here is when I look at the philosophy, I think about
Yeah,
this
Crash
idea.
was 29.
Pure
But
American
but in
Crash
the
was
late
29.
20s, it hit the farms before the
Well,
stock
that's
market
true,
crashed.
but I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
it's an interesting idea to bring into your classrooms, that if we had an organization like that, that was going through a desperate time, when we talk about the Nazis.
Yeah.
The KKK really kind of dissolved by the time we had the stock market crash, but even, farms.
But in Colorado, not really with the rest of the nation.
Right.
But
I'll show you guys some membership stats in a second. You'll see
Okay.
that by the 1930s, the thing is almost dead in the water.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. There's this bubble that opened up, and then just the organization just collapses. I don't know the reasons why, but I'll show you some of the membership stats in a second. But one thing that I do want to point out is for me at least, when I think about political philosophies of these organizations, what are they? What's their belief systems? And they have this purification of American society. So you have two ideas that are really complicated. And one, there's this idea of purification,
Right, eugenics.
so to speak, yeah, as best I can. So you already have a problem with what are they purifying exactly? Purifying to what? And the second thing is you have a national territory associated with it. So you have Nazis are interested in German, expanding the German territory, and they're all about territorial expansion. Here we have an association of this thing called an American society that needs to be purified. So then you get this whole contentious notion of who is and who is not American. What constitutes a true American, not a true American. So these are the really heavy-hitting ideas that emerge, and these are the symbols that I'm going to draw attention to.
Well, and
in the
that's what's so funny, because it's the first time the Nazis actually identified Jews as a race. They're the ones that identify the Jews as a race. So the idea that American society is identifying that American race, right? It's like this very distinct definition of who you are.
You have to operationalize race in some ways, what they have to do. Otherwise, they can't get it to work. But here's a Library of Congress image from around the 1920s, and you've got like a church or whatever it is. You got kids going to catechism, but here we got kids being inducted into the KKK.
Like offspring.
Right, what do they call the main leader due to the kid? What is he called again?
Clan Brandenburg.
Oh, my husband and I
Yes.
were talking about it. I was like, no, it's wizard. He's like, no, I think it's dragon.
That's Brandenburg.
Clan.
So here we have
The dragon, right.
Brandenburg.
Dragon.
So we got another image from the Library of Congress, 1925, right around peak.
Satanist.
Yeah, so here's a rally.
That's in broad daylight.
So you can see
Yeah.
it's pretty serious. There's so many people involved in this thing. This isn't a small a small organization. This is a big, big deal at this time period.
And they're not covering their faces.
Not, yeah, some of them that moment
Huh.
there. So here we get
Oh,
like.
yeah, go back to that, Eric, will you, for
Sure.
just a sec?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I wanna see.
Sorry. They're not covering their faces.
You know where that was?
They have it in the Library of Congress. I don't remember where it was. Some of them are labeled, some of them aren't.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be East Coast
That's
and
DC,
Midwest
isn't it?
are the two
I would
sites
have
that they.
to-
I think it's
put money
DC.
on it.
So it's either East Coast
Yeah.
or it's the Midwest. I don't know. Yeah, it's up there. There's only they only have 30 images. Some you can pick their own. They got detailed info. So here's an interesting statistic. Right? It's look at the population breakdown in the membership. And some of it's secret. So these are estimates, right, at the best. And I made up the 1924 one because there's not a U.S. census in 1924. It's just I extrapolated something in between the two. But you get 4 million in 1920. That's a lot of people. It spikes in 1924 to 6 million, and then by 1930 it had utterly collapsed as an organization.
5.5%, that's astoundingly high.
It's a pretty big organization, right, for what it is. But nonetheless, it's not like say 45% of the people are Democrats and 45% are Republicans. It's not they're in the range of independents or something like that, right? Green Party or something.
So could you, we talked about the idea of when there's poor economic issues, right, that it's the blame, right? It's the same thing with the Chinese, the riots in Tacoma, and anytime there's economic, but here we have the economic downfall, which is really, really peaking in 29 and 30, and that's when membership drops,
Yeah, so it starts to
So-
decline on that, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like we can't be bothered with being in a group, we're starving to death. It's almost like a luxury to be in a group, right?
So that's a
Well,
question.
it could be, I don't know, it's
Too.
one-
It's a historical causation, so I don't know if
Yeah.
the factors, for instance, that affected people economically were the same ones that were triggering this ideology. I don't know what caused the downfall.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm just speculating, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
it's a fair shot, there's something correlational, but I don't, do you know? We
Yeah,
talk about the
no.
collapse of the KKK, what's worth?
The embezzlement, what we talk about kind of the funds being kind of garnered in Colorado, Indiana, which was kind of the hub, had it much worse, where they had a huge financial support, but whoever their wizard was, I can't remember his name, got in a lot of trouble, and then legal trouble, so kind of their name in general, which had been very oh, here's this fraternal order that's speaking for, social climbers, it began to become linked with kind of some fraudulent economic activity. So people started to try to link their names. If you're a social climber, you want to be with a club that has a really polished name. This was one that had that, even though their ideology is somewhat.
Right.
But as they got in more trouble legally, people started to distance themselves from it.
And that's what's interesting, is people want to distance themselves because of the corruption, because of
The
money.
financial, not the-
Not because of the philosophy.
But they don't, but also again, they never really regain a lot of clout later on, so the
Right.
ideology definitely wasn't enough to pull people back in,
Right.
it wasn't people will still believe in nonsense and just give money to it even in the worst of times,
Mm-hmm.
It's for sure, but this is there's something, it may be worth saying at some point, but it's not our main point, but whatever the function,
Sure.
whatever happened between 1924 and 1930 is serious for this organization. It utterly demolished it, we probably see states drop out, zero representation in certain states, and very isolated, rural, I would imagine it becomes, as opposed to parades and all this kind of stuff just declines. You can't, it's not a population.
But it
base
is
to
the
work
end of the 20s, the roaring 20s, so to speak, so there's got to be some link there too.
And I also wonder, because wasn't there a huge rise in the Italian mafia, particularly in Chicago in the 30s and 40s? And I wonder if that's, if we talk about Indiana being a hub,
That
I wonder
takes
if,
over?
just again,
Well, yeah, speculating, yeah.
I remember that my CU professor, which we were going over, contemporary US history, which means we went over this in less than a 5-minute stretch, blamed it more on corruption, like Mike was saying, that there was a lot of corruption at a lot of different levels, that once they uncovered one spot, it was just like a domino
Yeah.
effect that uncovered all of these different operations that had been particularly embezzling a lot of money
Right.
and using it in their own personal manners.
Right, but again, I'm gonna keep thinking about that when times
Oh,
are bad,
context
you
is
can't join in a
definitely
group,
big.
you know?
I mean,
Yeah.
I would just write it down and run it
Yeah.
and run it, see if you can,
Yeah,
if it
I will.
shakes out. So we got another KKK parade, right? Another one I missed, the
And a
1925,
Mhm.
big time cross running down the middle of it. So here we got like an under the hood, right? So here's like a political group of individuals who are delegates of the KKK. So these are like the face, so to speak, so they're representing the KKK. In what capacity, I don't know. They might have just been lobbying, they could have been, talking to people at the House of Representatives, I don't, there's not a
I
lot of
noticed
backstory.
about them.
But you
Well,
get,
they're all white men.
yeah, so you get
Yeah.
3 white men,
It's kind
right?
of obvious,
So that's
right?
why I
Yeah.
like the under the hood sort of
Wealthy.
deal, right?
And
You pull the
wealthy,
face up
right?
and
They have
what kind of
suits on.
individuals do we see there?
Yeah.
They don't have, what's interesting is
They're
you
on a
don't see.
piano bench.
Oh,
Was
what?
it a piano bench? What was it in?
You don't see political, religious affiliation in this picture though, which is probably like the one big thing missing, but nonetheless, they had it and it would have been Protestant. Okay, so here we go. So we looked at a couple images from so I'm gonna throw out 3 images in like rapid succession. I'm gonna give you guys maybe like 3 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds per image to pull out one of the main symbols. Each one will have a couple symbols, but I want you just to pull that out. You can write them down real quick, or you can keep them in your memory. But this is going to be, it's called ráfaga in Spanish, like fast succession. Cool. So this is sort of like, I begin to do the teaching session a little bit here, right?
Okay.
All right, so check this out. Cool. So let's give it a second. So given that you had maybe like 3 seconds per thing, what are some of the major symbols that we're seeing being utilized by the KKK?
Yeah,
Religion,
cross in church.
cross in church, the lynching,
Flag.
the flag.
Weapon,
So,
churches.
here's the moment to say an inference. Give yourself a second. If you were to weave together like their sort of political philosophy plus the actions they were engaged in at this time, what might you say just based on those photographs? Right? Imagine like for a second that you're a student, you don't know a lot about the KKK, and you got hit with these 3 images in a row. What are they up to?
I
What's
think
the
mob
story?
mentality, looking
Mob
at that,
mentality.
because what we saw in all those pictures were lots of them, all looking the same.
Violent judgment.
Homogeneity,
That's a good
mob
point.
mentality, okay, fair enough.
Right, no one was alone. Except for that one guy.
We talk about nativism
Nativism.
Uh-huh.
and jingoism.
So attach that to a symbol for me.
So like nativism is like anything that's foreign, like that, that foreign, so here is this homogeneity of everybody in white, kind of, but then anything that's outside of that is not native, and so therefore it's not desirable.
Right. So what's this symbol then that's hooked up to? What was this symbol? Flag, I
flag,
think. The
yeah.
flag is it, right? So they're defining American and nativism in a very specific and narrow way. Not unrelated to our U.S. history though, right? I mean, we get a lot of Protestantism movement, a lot of this stuff going on on the East Coast in the colonial times, where we've got a mass exodus of Protestant religions from Europe. So they're not, like, there's some grain, like weird grain of truth in the background of what they're up to with their history of America, but it obviously isn't complete. So what did you think, like, in terms of like telling a story from those 3 based on the symbols?
So yeah, mob, nativism, and religion, well, you just talked about that, Protestantism.
So yeah, I was thinking the kind of the same thing. I had violence. So they're interested in violence and intimidation in one way, shape, or form. They're interested in American. They want to like really claim what is America. And they also had a lot of religious stuff, right? So then, what I would do is move to a really rich image that has just about every single one of those things in it. So let's see if we can identify all the symbols that we just talked about.
The flag.
So we get a flag. We got nativism, right? What else do we have?
The
Cross.
The white costumes.
The white costumes, and homogeneity, again, right? Homogeneity, Americanism, cross, and then what about this, like, in the foreground? What's going on there?
It's rich, some kind of ritual.
Some kind of ritual, probably associated with what?
Initiation.
Initiation. We're getting close. What about religion? Type of religion with that?
Is there baptism?
Oh, is it a baptism?
I don't know, but I think that's what it's trying to emulate, right?
Is it
Like you're
water in
kneeling in
his
front of it.
Emulate Yeah.
We're getting close to like a catechism.
Is that water in his hand?
I don't know, I can't tell what it is, but it very well might
Cup or
be.
something, right?
So there's like a
Sure is a
blessing,
wine.
there's like a blessing going on in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
So this guy's being initiated into like a organization with a series of beliefs, right?
Right, aren't they the knighthood, isn't he being like knighted?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that, which was a crusade, the crusades, I mean, the knights' words, that was what they did. That,
Yeah,
you know,
that is
spreading
interesting.
Christianity
I think
and
about that.
crusades.
Very, very.
Yeah, no, you could
Right?
kind of something there actually, yeah.
Because kneeling like that to me is Catholic, and they're anti-Catholic, like kneeling and getting like that in front of an altar, that's very Catholic.
But it maintains hierarchy, right?
Right, but so if it's kneeling, then I think, well, maybe it's knighting instead of, because they're not gonna be associated with Catholics, they're against Catholics.
Yeah, they won't
You
get
don't
into
kneel during
Catholicism.
communion.
Right,
Yeah,
Nonetheless, some of these rituals might be preserved in some
that's
branches
why I'm
of
saying like
Protestantism, right?
Protestants, like
Maybe
the,
not, no.
um,
So we get cross, we get homogeneity, we get nativism with the American
because
thing.
the
and we
knights
get-
used the cross too, as the sword,
Yeah.
was the
so-
cross.
so-
Mhm.
So this is a really, so these kind of images I think are like super rich, right? These ones can be like woven in and I think supplemented. They can help supplement some of the local stuff that we get into. And it gives you a bit of a blown out, like a fuller image of what the KKK was up to, and it gives you like good set of background stuff here to push on the kiddos. So to switch gears a little bit, like when I think about like how one might look at primary sources, right? So one of the difficult like teaching tasks is to go from primary sources, which are just like a loose collection of like items and stuff, images and newspaper articles, right? You want to go from that, and you want to have some kind of glue that holds them all together, that can then be basically pointed towards a lesson plan in some way that can produce learning in kids. That's not easy, you know. Personally, I think you guys are charged with a pretty hard task of digging through a bunch of primary sources and weaving a story and a lesson plan together. I don't think it's that easy to do really, really good. I think primary sources are actually pretty difficult and complex to work with. Super rewarding though, right? I mean, like each one of those images is like really intense, eerie. It has a lot of like imagery to it, and there is like some obvious themes that run through it. So what I try to do is I try to look at the symbols to then make inferences about what this group was up to, give them just a few background facts, right? Not so much that it's overwhelming, enough that you can learn, so that it allows you to then weave some kind of a story that hopefully is like sort of true. So what I try to push for in my lesson plan is basically like, what can you as a student tell me about the KKK? And the other half of the lesson plan is, what can you tell me then about the Latino immigrants? That's where we're going to get into some of the primary sources of the Latino lifestyle. And then if you lay these things out one next to another and you go on the line, say religion, X, Y, and Z, all these different factors, are you finding compatibility between the KKK and the Latinos? Or are you finding that there might be problems between these two individuals? And then they can make some kind of an assertion. They can like, well, my guess is that they're not going to get along well, or that maybe they're Christians, so why wouldn't they, right? They all believe in Jesus, right? So there's like points on both sides that I think they can fall down on. One of them is going to be right, I think, and one of them is going to be wrong, right? So that's what gets borne out in some of the newspaper articles and stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into this, right? What I think about is like when I dig around the primary sources, I think about what are things that I already know. So my own personal background knowledge, and that makes moving through the primary sources much faster. So I can already connect some kind of a story in my head. What's really hard is if you hand me a bunch of primary sources that I don't know. And I get really disoriented if I don't know anything about that moment in history or the topics. So what helps me to move pretty quickly through primary sources is having some kind of background knowledge and then identifying that pretty quickly in a primary source set, like you guys will see later on. And then like interesting primary source research or primary source resource searches, like our website is set up so that you get to do open searches. You can do closed stuff boxes, but like, you know, like like brainstorming, like what is related to this KKK thing? Is it church? Is it religion? Is it patriotism? You start using these words and start pulling out resources that are like related to these things that make sense for like telling a story about the KKK. And then the research question, I mean, I kind of push that really hard because I think the kids should have like a pretty answerable research question that's got some open-endedness to it. So they're looking for information, like specific information in these things.
Mm-hmm.
So we might line them up with symbols, and then after that we might say something like, okay, like now let's loop all these symbols together. What might you say about these? Like what might they be doing with these symbols? How might they be using them? Who's included and excluded? Stuff like that. And then another hot issue is going to be linking the local issues to national and international issues. So the KKK is one of these many organizations that's a right-wing, extremist, nativist group. This stuff happens all over the world. And sometimes they get power and sometimes they don't. A brilliant example, I think, that I put in my lesson plan was about, like brilliant in the sense that I think it works really well, is Ireland. So you can talk about the Reformation. Like, what is it that makes Catholics and Protestants different? What is it that splits them? And why are there examples in the world where you can look at, say, like, two countries right next to each other that are like, have been fighting for the last like 500 years, pretty much strong along religious lines. And what that'll do is I think it allows students to understand that you can believe in Jesus, but once you start getting nations, like patriotism, nations involved in deep histories of conflict, suddenly the similarities aren't enough to bridge the difficulties of the students, or difficulties of the other groups.
How about Sunnis and Shiites, I wonder?
Yeah, so now you go, well, no, I think their beliefs are, well, it depends how you want to spin it, but their beliefs might be a little more fundamentally different, right? So they believe in like bloodline following from Muhammad, who got it, who didn't. These of them, they don't argue about that. They argue about like authority, like what is the Pope?
But I think she means the religion is the same, like they still have that fundamental,
Yeah,
that,
talk
That's
about
right,
how
yeah.
religion and
Yeah.
politics
Right.
are
Yeah.
intertwined throughout history.
yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff will work. I think you just you gotta pick the example right, because there could be these things that are discontinuous across our example here, like Catholicism and that are, because things will play out differently in different countries and stuff like that. But that's what I track. And then, like I did before, like identify just a few facts, right? So don't give them so much that it's overwhelming, but give them a few facts to work with. And then it's on to this thing called designing lessons, right? But I think a lot of that will help. At least it helps me when I think about it. So it kind of works a little bit like this when I think I come up with a topic, something that's interesting to me. I could be inspired just by looking at the primary sources or do Marjorie's lections, and then I go to interesting searches that have to do with it, right? And then I develop some kind of research question, and then I look at the skills that might be required of students. What might they need to do in order to understand and extract information from a primary source? And again, it depends on the primary source, right? Maps will be different than pictures and stuff like that. And then a lesson is some kind of assessment, and the assessment, should have something to do with the research question, right? In some way, shape, or form to answer it. So, yeah. So, I put it all together. I get European history, some of the background, right? So I know a little bit about Protestantism and the battle and the Reformation and that kind of stuff. So that gives you something to work with. The primary sources, I got photographs and newspapers, what I dig around for, that's what I find on the website. And then you get something like the research questions like, how would the KKK have viewed the Latino population? What's your inference circulars, right? Primary sources, again, like pictures, right? Then you got other examples like Protestantism, and then you extract, right, like some of these ideas and pieces of evidence using the skills from the primary sources, and then get down to business. And I think if my lesson plan were to work, kids would end up with something like this. Some basic understanding that's along these lines. And this could be part of what they do. So in something, the question is, how do you think, right? Based on the information that we gather from our primary sources, and look into them, how do you think, kiddos? Like, how would the KKK do with how would the Latino population here in the KKK get along? And then you can hit them with one of those local newspaper articles, where they actually report out on incidents as what the KKK was doing.
Yeah, you'd have to do a lot of background on the Protestantism versus Roman
Yeah,
Catholic.
every time I
That's a
bring that up, I have to
huge-
go back to like the Reformation.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, you have
like-
to review, it's huge, because, and whether or not they got it in world history, or if they even covered it. Well, mostly you hope they covered it, but that's a lesson that's a huge lesson.
It is a big
Because
deal.
because they don't know anything about Ireland. Like modern Ireland,
Very well.
they don't know anything about modern Ireland.
Fortunately, there's a lot of really kid-friendly stuff. I found a bunch of long list of functions or of aspects of religion, of Protestant and Catholic. You can look at them, you can there's 40 or 50 variables where they're different. They're so do they hail to the Pope? Do they do this? Do they
Right.
believe in statues? One thing after another, and kids can then pull out some of their favorite, or you can pull out some of their favorite symbols that are used.
Well,
You can
or
show differences
misconceptions.
across.
And that's one of the ones I focus on, is that from the nativist point of view, a lot of Ku Klux Klan members think that Catholic allegiance is papal over,
Right.
the presidential, whereas Protestant would be presidential, so that hierarchy structure is something that, from the nativist point of view, again, they're really, really worried about.
And I bring that up again during the Kennedy election.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
Mhm.
that kind of,
Looking at our only
International.
Catholic, our only not Protestant president ever, still.
Right, yeah, Kennedy,
Yeah.
right, even today, yes, that's interesting.
It's
That's why I
Kennedy.
actually lead with that, I'm like, so
That's
what do you
it.
think, what if I told you there was only one Catholic president in the entire history of the United States?
That's
Is it
interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I like
fair?
that.
Yeah.
Is it not, is it not a fair election, what's going on? You're like, well, are we a Protestant country? Like how do you reconcile like inclusion with, there's all sorts of unique questions, but you can lead with something
And
like
people, that was a big criticism. My mother remembers very fearful about voting, well, she didn't vote for Kennedy because of Joe Kennedy was anti-Semitic, but people were worried about that he was going to be run, like you said, by the Pope, that the Pope was going to dictate American politics, and that was a big criticism of Kennedy. But he was really good. Right, of course he was.
Oh yeah, so here's like,
My
yeah,
mother,
so
the
we
only
got,
time my mother ever voted Republican was against Kennedy. The only time, she's like, go figure, I voted Nixon, oh my God.
so here's a couple of things, right, so like, so it's not gonna be like completely easy to pull all this together with the local resources, but, when I was digging through it, what I found like, so it should say KKK on the left, and on the right, it should say Latino, I didn't label it properly, but the right one, you get like these photographs, videos, and then you actually have Latino students, you can like poll them on what church their parents go to see if like their experience matches up with the Roman Catholic split versus Protestantism, and it should. That would be my impression. My family is extremely Roman Catholic, that's where I went, And you get pictures of First Communions, right? So that's sort of like an interesting like search you can do. First Communion, have the kids do that. Where are they? What church are they at, right? Pictures of churches that they attended, like all this stuff exists on our website. Video of like Latino places, and I think it was Longmont or something like that. You get an interview where people are talking about really important centers for them, and a woman is just like, yeah, the church was like the center of our activities, like when we were in Longmont.
And so much of this, for me, like, we don't have computers in our classroom, and it's really, really hard to get computers in our school. So for me, it would be me finding printing them out, opposed to having them search.
where do you teach?
Fairview?
Fairview?
Mhm.
Really?
And then you have the student fund of knowledge, right? Sort of like asking
Yeah.
students themselves, like polling
Right.
certain students in a classroom, like, hey, where do you go to church? Where do you go to church? And you can see, I suspect some of this stuff has not gone away, right? You'll still see, different people going to different churches, and that'll be, I think, along the Protestant and Roman Catholic lines.
Are you?
Won't surprise me in the slightest.
You're allowed, but I generally don't.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah,
do
I'm like, are
that.
you?
Yeah, I
allowed
wouldn't
to do
ask
that?
about.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, that's just asking a question, right? Yeah.
Well,
It's not where you go. Does anybody want to, volunteer
Mhm.
where they might attend service? You really have to be,
How is that?
careful.
I didn't even think about it.
yeah, you don't want to assume that they're all church going. You don't go to church is an answer you'll get oftentimes, and then that creates its own.
And you don't want the native
hierarchy.
informant, the one that is, all of a sudden has to be the one who tells all things about Catholicism or all things about, like that native
Judaism.
informant. Right, exactly, like you don't want to be
I was
that.
trying to just get one piece of information. I wasn't trying to go down the rabbit hole. I was like, well, no, like, write on a piece of, write on a piece of paper, hand it in, I don't know.
I only say that because I've gone down that rabbit hole.
Cool. So yeah, at this point, if you guys wanted to, I would invite you to go on our website